My name is Elias Thorne. I am 68 years old, and for 45 of those years, I worked the same stretch of land my father worked before me. It was 180 acres bordering the national forest in the northern part of the state, a place where the mountains begin to forget what people look like. My wife, Martha, she passed from a cancer that came on fast and left even faster, 10 years ago now. After that, the world got quiet. The silence on the farm wasn't peaceful anymore. It was just empty. It was me, the cattle, a few chickens, and the endless green wall of the forest. I was competent in that world. I knew the turn of the seasons by the smell of the air and the slant of the light. I knew the language of the animals, the call of a nervous deer, the angry chatter of a squirrel. I thought I knew everything that walked or crawled on my land. I was wrong. The life of a farmer, especially one alone, is a rhythm. You rise before the sun. You work until it sets. You fall into bed, too tired to dream. It's a hard life, but it's an honest one. You see the tangible results of your labor in the full-bellied cows and the neat rows of hay. It grounds you. That grounding was my anchor, the thing that kept me from drifting away after Martha was gone. The farm was a demanding partner. It didn't leave much room for grief to fester. But the loneliness was a patient predator, always waiting at the edges, in the quiet of the house at night, in the empty chair across the kitchen table. I suppose that's why I did what I did. A lonely man will make a fool's bargain with any kind of company. It was 8 years ago, late in the spring. A storm had torn through the night before, one of those violent squalls that rattles the windows and makes you feel small. Thunder had cracked like the sky was splitting open, and the wind had a physical weight to it. The next morning, the air was washed clean, smelling of wet earth and pine. I went out to check the fence line on the north pasture, the one that runs right up against the forest boundary. The storm had dropped a massive old oak right across the wire, crushing 3 sections of fence like they were toothpicks. It was a common enough chore, clearing fallen trees, but as I got closer, I heard a sound. It was a thin, high-pitched whimpering. It wasn't the cry of a fawn or a coyote pup, sounds I knew as well as my own heartbeat. This was different. It was a sound of profound misery, sharp and desperate. I shut down the chainsaw and listened. It came from a thicket of tangled rhododendron just on the other side of the broken fence, deep in the shadows of the forest proper. My first thought was a stray dog. Maybe someone's pet got lost in the storm. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed the tire iron from my truck's toolbox, more for pushing brush aside than for protection, and pushed my way into the thicket. The smell hit me first. It was the coppery, raw scent of a fresh kill, thick and heavy in the humid air. And under that, the musk of an animal I'd never smelled before. It was pungent, almost sour. Pushing aside the last branch, I saw the source of the sound and the smell. Lying at the base of a lightning-scarred pine was a creature. It was the mother. She was enormous, bigger than any black bear I'd ever seen, with coarse, dark fur matted with blood and mud. Her form was wrong. It was vaguely canine, but the proportions were nightmarish. The shoulders were too broad, the limbs too long, the torso too lean. Her head was wolf-like, with a long snout filled with yellow teeth, but it was crushed on one side, a ruin of bone and tissue. A massive splintered branch from the fallen oak lay across her back. The storm had killed her, and nestled against her cooling flank, shivering and crying, was the pup. It was small, no bigger than a newborn German shepherd, but it was built like a miniature version of its mother. The paws were unsettlingly large, the digits long and separate, looking more like gnarled little hands than paws.
Its fur was the same coarse black hair. When it saw me, it stopped whimpering and just stared. Its eyes weren't the milky blue of a normal pup. They were a pale, startling yellow, and they were focused. There was an intelligence in that gaze, an awareness that sent a cold spike down my spine. It was looking at me, not just seeing me. Every instinct I had, every bit of woodsman sense honed over a lifetime, screamed at me to back away slowly, go home, and forget I ever saw it. This was not a dog. It was not a wolf or a coyote or a bear. It was something other, something that belonged to the deep, dark places of the world that sensible people pretend don't exist. But it was also a baby.
A helpless, orphaned thing, crying for its dead mother. It looked at me, and I saw the loneliness in its eyes, a reflection of my own. I stood there for a long time, the silence of the forest pressing in. Then I did the stupidest, most dangerous thing I've ever done in my life. I wrapped the creature in my canvas jacket, lifted it from its mother's side, and carried it home. I named him Fen. It was a private joke, a nod to the monstrous wolf of Norse myth. It seemed fitting. I set him up in the barn, in an empty stall filled with fresh straw. I tried giving him warm milk with a bottle, but he refused it, turning his head away with a low, unhappy growl. He wanted meat. I minced some beef from my own freezer, and he devoured it, his little jaws working with a startling ferocity. From that day on, a new rhythm was added to my life. Tending the farm and tending the thing in the barn. The first year was a series of shocks. Fen grew at a rate that defied biology. He doubled in size in a month, then again a month after that. By 6 months, he was the size of a full-grown wolf, but taller, leaner, with those unnervingly long limbs. His intelligence was staggering. He didn't learn commands so much as he seemed to understand intent. I never had to house train him. He instinctively used a corner of the pasture far from the house and barn. He learned the farm's routines by observation. He knew when I went to feed the cattle, when I came in for lunch, when I locked up for the night. He would watch me, those pale yellow eyes tracking my every move, his head tilted in concentration. He never barked, not once. His vocalizations were a bizarre collection of clicks, chuffs, and deep, guttural growls that rumbled in his chest. Sometimes, when he was frustrated or wanted my attention, he'd make a series of rhythmic clicks and whines that sounded disturbingly like an attempt at speech. It was a chilling mimicry, and it always made the hair on my arms stand up. I kept him a secret, of course. When I went to the feed store, I'd mention I'd gotten a new dog, some kind of rare mastiff mix, to explain the massive bags of feed and cheap meat I was buying. No one ever pressed it. People in the country respect a man's privacy. His anatomy became more pronounced, more wrong, as he grew. He walked on all fours most of the time, but with a strange, loping gait, his back legs seeming to have an extra joint. But more and more I would find him standing. He'd lean against the barn wall or a fence post, perfectly balanced on his hind legs, surveying the farm like a landlord. His front paws, those things I'd first thought of as hands, became more dexterous. I watched him one day pick up a fallen apple, turn it over and over, examining it with an unnerving curiosity before crushing it in his jaws. He could manipulate things. He learned how to nudge open the barn door if I didn't latch it securely. By the end of the second year, Fen was enormous. Standing on his hind legs, he was taller than me, well over 6 feet. His strength was terrifying. I saw him grab a railroad tie I used for a fence post and toss it aside like it was a piece of kindling. My cattle were terrified of him, but he never harmed them. He seemed to understand they were mine. He had designated the entire farm as his territory, and I was part of it. He began patrolling the fence line every night, a silent black shadow moving with a liquid grace that was beautiful and horrifying at the same time. He was my protector. He was my jailer. The disappearances started in the 3rd year. My nearest neighbor, a man named Miller who lived 2 miles down the road, lost a calf. Then another. He blamed coyotes, but I knew better. The kills were too clean, too total.
A few weeks later, a prize-winning show goat vanished from a farm on the other side of the ridge. No tracks, no blood, just an empty pen. I knew it was Fen. He was hunting at night, ranging farther and farther from the farm. I felt a cold knot of guilt and fear in my stomach. I was harboring a killer, a predator unlike any other. I was an accomplice. I tried to control him, to provide enough food so he wouldn't need to hunt. I bought a second freezer and filled it with butcher scraps and roadkill deer I'd haul home. He ate it all, his appetite insatiable, but he still went out at night. It wasn't just about hunger, it was about the hunt itself. It was his nature. My bond with him had become a complex, twisted thing. I still cared for him. I'd raised him from a shivering, helpless thing. In those moments, he was just my Fen. But then he would turn his head, and I'd see the cold, ancient intelligence in his yellow eyes, and I knew I was just fooling myself. I was living with a monster. The incident with the hiker happened when Fen was 5. He was fully mature then, a giant of corded muscle and black fur, standing close to 7.5 feet tall. A young man, a tourist from the city, had gotten lost hiking in the national forest and stumbled onto my property. I was in the barn when I heard the man shouting for help. I came out and saw him standing by the pasture gate, looking bewildered. Before I could call out to him, Fen emerged from the tree line. He didn't make a sound. One moment, there was nothing but trees. The next, he was there. He stood on his hind legs, perfectly still, just watching the hiker. He wasn't growling or showing his teeth. He was just a massive, impossible silhouette against the dark woods. The hiker froze. I could see the color drain from his face. Every instinct of prey, seeing a predator, kicked in. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then the hiker turned, slowly, and practically ran back the way he came. Fen watched him go, then dropped silently to all fours and melted back into the forest. I was furious and terrified. I stormed into the woods, calling his name. He appeared before me minutes later, tilting his head with that look of canine innocence that was so at odds with his form. I yelled at him, my voice shaking. "You can't do that. You'll scare people. They'll come looking. They'll come with guns." He just watched me, his expression unreadable, but I swear he understood. He knew he had defended his territory from an intruder, and in that moment, I understood my situation completely. I was trapped. I couldn't tell anyone about him. They would hunt him down and kill him, and I couldn't get rid of him. He was too strong, too smart, and, God help me, I was still bound to him. My life was no longer my own. It revolved around containing and concealing the creature I had raised. The next 3 years were a slow, grinding exercise in tension. Our relationship, if you could call it that, settled into a strange routine. He had the nights, and I had the days. We coexisted. I felt like a warden at a private one-inmate prison. The affection I once felt had been replaced by a constant, low-level fear. It was the fear you feel around a loaded gun. You trust it not to go off, but you're always aware of what it could do. I would watch him from the kitchen window as he sat at the edge of the woods at dusk, a silent, waiting sentinel. What was he thinking? Did he feel anything for me? Or was I just the creature that brought him food? I got my answer one autumn evening. I had taken my rifle and gone into the forest on the far side of my property, hoping to bag a deer for the winter.
I was in my hunting stand, a small platform nailed 20 feet up an old pine, overlooking a clearing. I was perfectly still, watching the light fade, when I saw movement. It was Fen. He was on the far side of the clearing, and he didn't know I was there. He wasn't just walking, he was hunting. What I saw chilled me to the bone. He moved with a terrifying purpose. He stayed low, using the shadows and undergrowth for cover, moving with a silence that should have been impossible for a creature his size. He herded a small group of does, not by chasing them, but by subtly directing their movement. A thrown rock here, a snapped twig there. He was manipulating their fear, pushing them exactly where he wanted them, towards a steep, narrow ravine at the edge of the clearing. It was a perfect ambush. It wasn't the work of an animal operating on instinct. It was strategy. It was a tactical operation. As the lead doe entered the trap, he exploded from cover, a blur of black fury. It was over in seconds. I watched him from my perch, my rifle feeling like a toy in my hands. I saw him not as my Fen, the pup I had raised, but as what he truly was, a predator of terrifying intelligence, an apex predator. And I realized with a sudden, sickening clarity that I hadn't raised an animal. I had raised something that was, in its own way, a person. A very smart, very strong, very alien person, whose entire existence was built around the hunt and the kill. I climbed down from my stand, my legs weak, and went back to the house. That night, for the first time in 8 years, I locked my bedroom door. The end came on a cold, moonless night in November. The kind of night where the darkness feels solid, like you could cut it with a knife. I was in the house, reading by the fire, when I heard the sound of a car engine dying on the road out front. It coughed, sputtered, and went silent. A few minutes later, there was a hesitant knock on my door. My heart hammered in my chest. Visitors at night were rare. Visitors at night were a problem. A big one. I opened the door to find a young couple, city kids by the look of them, shivering in the cold. Their names were Brian and Megan. Their car had broken down. They were scared and cold, and they just wanted to use a phone to call a tow truck. I am not a cruel man. I let them in. My mind was racing. Where was Fen? I had seen him head for the barn an hour earlier. I had latched the main door. He should have been secure. I told myself it would be fine. They would make their call, the truck would come, and they would be gone in an hour. Megan made the call while Brian, trying to be friendly, asked me about the farm. He was full of nervous energy, a joker. He made a comment about how spooky it was out here, how you could probably hear a pin drop. I just nodded, my ears straining for any sound from outside. I offered them coffee, trying to seem like a normal, hospitable old farmer, but my insides were twisted into a cold knot. Every nerve was screaming, "Get them out now." And then the lights went out. The house was plunged into absolute blackness, the only light coming from the faint orange glow of the fireplace. Megan gave a little scream. Brian laughed it off. "Probably just the wind," he said. But there was no wind. I knew instantly what it was. The main power line came in on a pole at the edge of the yard. It was something that could be reached, something that could be cut. Fen was out, and he was hunting. A sound came from the porch, a long, slow scrape of claws on wood. Megan whimpered, moving closer to Brian. "What was that?" she whispered. "A raccoon," Brian said, his voice a little too loud. Big one, probably. I knew better. I went to the gun cabinet in the living room and pulled out my .30-06 elk rifle. "Stay away from the windows," I said, my voice low and steady. It was the only thing I could control. The scraping stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was a heavy, listening silence. I could feel him out there, circling the house, testing it. A soft thud came from the kitchen wall, as if something heavy had leaned against it. Then a sound from the back door, the doorknob rattling, gently at first, then more insistently. He was trying the doors. He had watched me. He had learned. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a beast trying to get in. This was an intelligence trying to solve a problem. Brian, despite my warning, decided he was going to be the hero. "I'm just going to take a peek," he said, pulling a small flashlight from his pocket. "It's probably just a bear." He moved to the front window, the one that looked out onto the porch. "Brian, no," Megan pleaded. I started to move towards him, to pull him back, but it was too late. He raised the flashlight and clicked it on, shining the beam through the glass. For a split second, a face was illuminated in the window. A long canine snout, lips curled back from yellow fangs, and two pale, glowing eyes filled with a cold, hateful light. It was a nightmare given form. Brian recoiled, stumbling backward with a choked cry, but he wasn't fast enough. The window exploded inward in a shower of glass. A long black arm, impossibly muscular and covered in coarse hair, shot through the opening. The hand, with its thick, claw-tipped fingers, seized Brian by the front of his jacket. There was no struggle. He was lifted off his feet and pulled, screaming, through the shattered window and into the darkness. The scream was cut short with a sickening, wet crunch. Megan's shriek was a raw, physical thing that filled the small house. Panic took her. She just stood there, screaming and screaming. I grabbed her by the arm, hard. "We have to move, now!" The front door shuddered as something massive threw itself against it. The wood groaned and the frame splintered. It wouldn't hold for long. The back of the house was our only chance. I dragged the hysterical girl through the kitchen, my mind working with the cold, clear focus that only comes with absolute terror. The truck. If we could make it to my old Ford pickup, we might have a chance. I shoved the kitchen table against the back door, a useless gesture, but I had to do something. I slid open the small window over the sink. "Climb out," I ordered her. "Run for the truck. I'll be right behind you." She was frozen, her eyes wide with horror. I had to physically push her toward the opening. She scrambled through, falling into the muddy yard outside. I followed, the heavy rifle in my hands, my heart feeling like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. The yard was a landscape of shifting shadows. The air was cold and carried the scent of blood. The front door of the house finally gave way with a crash of splintering wood. We ran. My truck was parked 50 yards away, near the barn. It felt like miles. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Megan was sobbing as she ran, stumbling in the dark. I kept a hand on her back, pushing her forward. We were halfway there when a shape detached itself from the deeper shadow of the barn. It was Fen. He stood there, on two legs, blocking our path. He was larger than I had ever seen him, a towering monolith of black fur against the night sky. In one of his hands he held the mangled body of Brian, gripping it like a child might hold a broken doll. He dropped the body to the ground without a sound and took a step towards us. He wasn't rushing. He was savoring it. He was hurting us, cutting off our escape. This was his territory, and we were the prey. The moonlight caught his eyes, and they glowed with a terrifying, patient intelligence. I raised the rifle, the stock slick with sweat in my hands. I centered the sights on his chest. "Get behind me," I whispered to Megan. My voice was shaking. This creature, this thing of darkness, was the pup I had fed from my hand. the one who used to lay his head on my lap by the fire. "Finn," I said, my voice cracking. "Don't." He paused, his head tilting slightly as if processing the sound. Then he let out a low growl that was not of this world. It was a sound of rocks grinding together, of ancient hatred. He took another step. I fired. The report of the .30-06 was deafening in the night. The muzzle flash lit the scene in a brilliant, momentary tableau. I saw the bullet strike him high in the shoulder. He staggered back, a real bellow of pain and rage tearing from his throat. It wasn't the yelp of a wounded animal. It was an articulate roar of fury. He looked at the wound, then back at me, and the intelligence in his eyes was now blazing with murder. I worked the bolt and fired again, this time hitting him in the thick muscle of his thigh. He roared again, but he didn't fall. He charged. He covered the distance between us in 3 long, loping strides. He was a blur of motion. I tried to bring the rifle up for a third shot, but he was too fast. He swatted the gun from my hands with a casual flick of his wrist. The rifle flew through the air and hit the side of the barn with a crack of splintering wood. He stood over me, his foul breath washing over my face, a smell of raw meat and damp earth. He could have killed me in a heartbeat. He could have torn my head from my shoulders, but he didn't. Instead, he reached down with one of his clawed hands and picked up the rifle. He looked at it, then at me, and then, with a terrifying, deliberate motion, he bent the steel barrel into a U-shape over his knee. He tossed the ruined weapon aside. The message was clear. Your weapons are toys. You are helpless. He turned his attention to Megan, who had fallen to the ground and was scrambling backward in the mud, sobbing. In that moment, I knew I couldn't fight him. I couldn't win. But maybe, just maybe, I could reach him. I did the only thing I had left. I stood up, putting myself between him and the girl. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I spoke to him, my voice low and trembling. "Finn," I said, "it's me. It's Elias." He stopped, his yellow eyes narrowing. The rage in them seemed to temper, replaced by something else. Confusion? Recognition? "Easy now, boy," I whispered, using the same tone I had used 1,000 times when he was a pup, scared of thunder. "Easy now." He stared at me, his massive head cocked to one side. A low whine escaped his throat, a sound I hadn't heard in years. It was a sound of conflict. For a fraction of a second, the monster was gone, and I saw the orphan I had rescued from the storm. It was my only chance. "Run," I hissed to Megan, not taking my eyes off Finn. "Get to the road. Go, now." I shoved her behind me without looking. "Don't stop running." She scrambled to her feet and fled into the darkness. I stood my ground, facing the creature I had made. I braced for the attack, for the claws and the teeth. I had made my peace. I had bought her time. But the attack never came. Fenn looked at me for a long moment, then looked in the direction Megan had fled. He took a step, then another, not towards me, but towards the body of the boy. He effortlessly lifted the corpse, slung it over his shoulder, and with one last unreadable look at me, he turned and loped back into the impenetrable darkness of the forest. He just left. He had spared me. I don't know if it was mercy, or if I simply wasn't part of the hunt. I'll never know. I found Megan collapsed on the gravel road a quarter of a mile away, in shock but unharmed.
I got her into the truck, the one thing Fenn had ignored, and I drove. I didn't stop until the lights of town appeared on the horizon. At the sheriff's office, the story poured out of me, but it was a different story. The true story was impossible. I told them a bear, a freakishly large and aggressive bear, had attacked the house. I told them it had broken in and taken the boy. I told them we had barely escaped with our lives. It was the only story they would believe. They investigated, of course. Deputies went out to the farm the next day. They found the scene just as I'd left it. The shattered window, the demolished door, the blood in the yard. They found my rifle, bent into a useless crescent. They found tracks, huge and deep in the mud, that they couldn't identify. They looked vaguely canine, they said, but also vaguely like a man's bare foot. Too big for any known animal. They found what was left of Brian a week later, deep in the woods.
The official report listed the cause of death as an animal attack. Perpetrator unknown, presumed to be a black bear of unusual size and aggression. Case closed. Megan's testimony was a jumble of hysterics and trauma, but it matched the basics of my bear story. No one questioned it too deeply. It was a tragedy, but a simple one. A wild animal had done a wild thing. Only one person seemed to doubt it. The old sheriff, a man named Gable who was nearing retirement, pulled me aside after I gave my final statement. He looked at me with tired, knowing eyes. "Elias," he said, his voice quiet, "I've been working these woods for 40 years. I've seen what bears can do. They don't rattle doorknobs. They don't bend rifle barrels in half." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Whatever you and that girl saw up there, some things are older than the trees. My advice to you is to sell that farm and walk away. Don't ever go back." I took his advice. I sold the farm for a loss to a timber company who only wanted the land. I couldn't set foot in that house again. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow cast by the setting sun was him. I live in a small apartment in a town 300 miles away now. It's a place with streetlights and sirens and the constant hum of other people. There are no deep woods here, but the woods are still inside me. I wake up at night, my heart pounding, the memory of those yellow eyes burning in the dark. The guilt is a physical weight. Brian is dead because of me, because I was a lonely old man who brought a monster into his home. I tried to tell the full story once, to a psychiatrist the state made me see. I told him everything, about finding the pup, about raising him, about what he became. The doctor listened patiently, then doubled my medication and suggested inpatient treatment. I learned my lesson. The truth is a burden you bear alone. I am isolated by what I know, by what I did. I raised a monster, and for a long time, I think I loved him. Or maybe I just loved not being alone. Was there ever a bond between us? Or was I just a convenient food source, a tool he tolerated until he no longer needed me? Did he spare my life out of some lingering affection, or was it a predator's cold calculation? A message that he could kill me anytime he chose? I don't have the answers. I just have the memories. And a warning. The world is not as safe and well lit as you think. There are things sleeping in the dark places, in the vast, quiet woods where the maps are blank. They are smart, and they are ancient, and they are hungry. Be careful where you wander. Be careful what you pity. I found an orphan in the woods, and it showed me the real, terrible face of the world. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when the city is quiet, I find myself wondering if he's still out there, and if he ever remembers the old man who gave him a name.